The frost settled over Chico, California like a shroud, and Hazel Fairchild pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, believing that if she made herself small enough in the December cold of 1876, the world might forget she existed altogether. She had been working at the Golden Promise Saloon for 3 months now, serving drinks and dodging advances from miners and ranchers who passed through town with gold dust in their pockets and whiskey on their breath. The winter had driven most folks indoors, and Hazel had found a strange comfort in the season's harshness. When snow dusted the streets and the wind howled through the gaps in the wooden buildings, people kept their heads down and their eyes to themselves. They stopped noticing the plain-faced girl with the fading bruise on her cheekbone, the one she had gotten from her stepfather back in Sacramento, before she fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's wedding ring sewn into the hem of her dress. Winter made her invisible, and invisibility meant safety. She was wiping down the bar on a particularly bitter afternoon when the door swung open, letting in a gust of icy wind and a man who stood at least 6 feet tall. Hazel kept her eyes on the wood grain beneath her cloth, counting the swirls and knots like she always did when customers entered. She had learned not to make eye contact, not to smile, not to give any indication that she wanted conversation or company. "Whiskey," the man said, his voice deep and steady, not slurred like so many who came through these doors. Hazel nodded without looking up, reaching for a glass and the bottle behind her. She poured 2 fingers' worth and slid it across the bar, still avoiding his gaze. Her hands were red and chapped from the cold, and she tucked them quickly into her apron pockets. "Much obliged," he said, and she heard the clink of coins on the bar top. She waited until she heard his footsteps retreat to a corner table before she allowed herself to breathe properly again. The saloon owner, a rotund man named Chester who smelled perpetually of cigars and sweat, emerged from the back room and grunted his approval at the coins. "That is Quinn Gallagher," Chester said, picking up the money and biting one of the coins to test its authenticity. "Rancher from up north, brings his cattle through here sometimes. Pays well, does not cause trouble. Make sure his glass stays full." Hazel nodded, tucking a strand of mousy brown hair behind her ear. She risked a glance at the corner table where Quinn Gallagher sat, his hat pushed back just enough to reveal dark hair, and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. He was looking out the window at the snow beginning to fall, his expression thoughtful and distant. She turned away quickly, busying herself with rearranging bottles that did not need rearranging. The afternoon wore on, and more customers trickled in seeking refuge from the cold. Hazel moved through her duties like a ghost, refilling drinks and collecting coins, speaking only when absolutely necessary. She had perfected the art of being present without being seen, of occupying space without drawing attention. It was a skill she had developed over years of living with a stepfather whose moods shifted like wind direction, whose fists flew when she spoke too loudly, or moved too slowly, or simply existed in a way that displeased him. When she brought Quinn Gallagher his second whiskey, she placed it on his table without a word, already turning to leave. "Thank you," he said, and something in his tone made her pause despite her better judgment. She nodded once, a quick jerk of her head, and continued her retreat. "Cold out there today," he continued, and Hazel felt her shoulders tense. She did not want conversation. Conversation led to questions, and questions led to lies she would have to remember, and lies had a way of tangling themselves into nooses. "Yes, sir," she managed, keeping her voice soft and neutral. "You have been working here long?" he asked, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "A few months, sir." She shifted her weight, angling her body toward the bar toward escape. "Where are you from?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of anxiety through her chest. "Around," she said vaguely. "If you need anything else, just holler." She did not wait for his response before hurrying back behind the bar, her heart beating faster than the question warranted. She told herself it was just polite conversation, that the man meant nothing by it. But experience had taught her that interest, even innocent interest, could turn dangerous without warning. Quinn Gallagher stayed until evening, nursing his whiskey and occasionally ordering food from the kitchen. Hazel served him when necessary, but she made sure their interactions were brief and impersonal. She noticed, though she tried not to, that his eyes were a striking shade of green, like pine trees after rain, and that his hands, while calloused and strong, moved with surprising gentleness when he handled his glass or the book he eventually pulled from his saddlebag. A rancher who read books. That was unusual enough to snag her curiosity, but she pushed the thought away as firmly as she pushed away everything else that threatened to make her visible. When her shift ended at 10 o'clock, Hazel collected her meager wages from Chester and wrapped herself in her shawl and the thin wool coat she had bought secondhand. The walk to her boarding house was 6 blocks, and the temperature had dropped considerably since afternoon. Snow fell in earnest now, thick flakes that muffled sound and turned the world into a blur of white and shadow. She kept her head down and her pace quick, navigating the familiar route by memory more than sight. The boarding house where she rented a tiny room was run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who asked few questions and expected rent on time. It was not much, just a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small stove that barely kept the cold at bay, but it was hers. Safe. Private. Hazel was halfway there when she heard footsteps behind her. Her body went rigid, every instinct screaming danger. She walked faster, her worn boots slipping slightly on the snow-covered boardwalk. The footsteps matched her pace. "Miss," a voice called out, and she recognized it as Quinn Gallagher's. "Miss, wait a moment." She did not wait. She could not afford to trust male voices calling out to her in the dark, no matter how polite they sounded. She turned down an alley she knew well, one that would cut through to the next street and bring her to the boarding house from a different direction. "Miss, please," he called again, and she heard his pace quicken. Panic clawed at her throat. She started to run, her shawl slipping from her shoulders, the cold biting through her thin dress. She did not make it 10 feet before her boot caught on something hidden beneath the snow, and she went down hard, her hands scraping against frozen dirt and stone. "Are you hurt?" Quinn was beside her in an instant, his large frame blocking the wind. "I am sorry. I did not mean to frighten you. I just wanted to return this." He held out her shawl, which must have fallen when she first started walking. In the dim light from a nearby window, she could see genuine concern on his face, no threat or anger, just worry. Hazel's hands were shaking as she pushed herself up to sitting. Her palms stung where the skin had scraped away, and she could feel the wet warmth of blood even through the cold. "Let me help you," Quinn said, extending his hand. She flinched away instinctively, and something shifted in his expression, a flash of understanding that made her stomach clench. "I am not going to hurt you," he said quietly, lowering his hand but not moving away. "I just thought you might want your shawl back. It is too cold to be without it." Hazel stared at him, trying to reconcile the kindness in his voice with every lesson she had learned about men and their intentions. The snow continued to fall around them, catching in his dark hair and on the shoulders of his heavy coat. "Thank you," she finally whispered, reaching out to take the shawl. Her fingers brushed his for just a moment, and she pulled back quickly, wrapping the fabric around herself. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded, getting her feet under her despite the protest of her bruised knees and stinging palms. Quinn stood as well, maintaining a respectful distance that she appreciated more than he could know. "I will walk you the rest of the way," he said. "Make sure you get home safe." "That is not necessary," Hazel said quickly. "I am fine." "I know it is not necessary," Quinn replied, his tone gentle but firm. "But the streets are not safe for a woman alone at night, and I would feel poorly about myself if I did not see you safely home after causing you to fall." "You did not cause me to fall. I tripped." "You tripped because you were running from me, which you were doing because I called out to you in the dark like a fool, so I bear some responsibility." He gestured down the street. "Please. It would ease my conscience." Hazel wanted to refuse, wanted to send him away and maintain the careful walls she had built around herself, but the genuine regret in his voice made her hesitate. And truthfully, the streets were not safe at night. Just last week, a woman had been robbed 2 blocks from the saloon. "All right," she said finally, "but I do not need an escort regularly, just tonight." "Understood," Quinn said, and he fell into step beside her, keeping that same careful distance. They walked in silence for a block, the snow crunching beneath their boots. Hazel kept her eyes forward, hyper-aware of his presence beside her, the way he shortened his stride to match hers, the way he positioned himself between her and the street, like a barrier against the wind and anything else that might come. "I am sorry for frightening you," he said after a while. "That was not my intention." "It is fine," Hazel said, though her heart was still beating too fast. "It is not fine," Quinn countered. "A woman should not have to be afraid walking home from work, and a man should know better than to chase after her in the dark." They walked another block before he spoke again. "I come through Chico about once a month during the winter," he said. "Checking on business interests, selling cattle, that sort of thing. I have been noticing you at the Golden Promise for a few weeks now." Hazel's breath caught. "You have?" "Yes, madam. Hard not to notice someone who tries so hard not to be noticed, if that makes sense." It did not make sense to her. The entire point of making herself invisible was so that people would not see her, would not remember her, would not care enough to follow her or hurt her or drag her back to Sacramento. "I do not know what you mean," she said stiffly. Quinn was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. "You move through that saloon like you are trying to disappear. Keep your head down, do not make eye contact, speak as little as possible. You are always working, always busy, always somewhere else in your mind even when your body is present. I have seen women do that before when they are trying to avoid being seen, usually because being seen has brought them trouble." Hazel's throat tightened. They had reached the boarding house, its weathered sign creaking in the wind. She stopped at the bottom of the steps, turning to face him. "Thank you for returning my shawl and for walking me home," she said formally. "Good night, Mr. Gallagher. How did you know my name?" He asked, a slight smile touching his lips. "Chester told me, the saloon owner." "Ah," he touched the brim of his hat. "Then good night, Miss Fairchild," she said before she could think better of it. "Hazel Fairchild." "Miss Fairchild," he repeated, and somehow her name sounded different in his voice, like it meant something. "I hope your hands heal quickly. Put some salve on those scrapes if you have any." She nodded and turned to climb the steps, feeling his eyes on her back. When she reached the door, she could not help glancing back. He was still standing there in the falling snow, watching to make sure she got inside safely. Something twisted in her chest, an emotion she could not quite name. She slipped inside quickly and closed the door, leaning against it and pressing her cold hands to her even colder cheeks. That night, lying in her narrow bed with her scraped palms wrapped in strips of clean cloth, Hazel thought about what Quinn Gallagher had said. He had been noticing her. Even when she tried to be invisible, even when she wrapped herself in winter and silence and careful anonymity, he had seen her. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it kept her awake until dawn, her mind turning it over and over like a puzzle she could not solve. Quinn Gallagher returned to the Golden Promise Saloon 3 days later, shaking snow from his coat and stamping his boots before settling at the same corner table. Hazel's stomach fluttered when she saw him, a sensation so unfamiliar she almost mistook it for illness. She poured his whiskey and brought it to his table, setting it down with the same efficiency she used for every customer. "Thank you, Miss Fairchild," he said, and the use of her name made 2 other men at a nearby table glance over with interest. Hazel felt heat rise to her cheeks. She nodded and turned to leave, but his next words stopped her. "How are your hands?" She looked down at her palms, which were healing but still tender. "Fine, sir. I am glad to hear it." He picked up his glass but did not drink, just held it loosely between his fingers. "I wanted to apologize again for the other night. I have been kicking myself for being so careless." "There is no need," Hazel said quietly, aware of the other customers watching their exchange with varying degrees of interest. Conversations were currency in small towns, and she did not want to become the subject of gossip. Quinn seemed to sense her discomfort. He nodded once and turned his attention to his whiskey, releasing her from the obligation to respond. But he came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time, he ordered whiskey, sometimes food, and he always said thank you when she brought it. He did not push for conversation beyond simple pleasantries, did not ask personal questions or make inappropriate comments. He simply occupied his corner table, reading his books or reviewing ledgers, occasionally looking out the window at the snow that continued to fall throughout December. After a week of this routine, Hazel found herself relaxing slightly in his presence. He was unlike the other men who frequented the saloon, the ones who grabbed at her skirts or made lewd suggestions or drank themselves into angry stupors. Quinn Gallagher drank moderately, spoke respectfully, and seemed content with his own company. She began to notice small things about him. The way he treated everyone with the same courtesy, from Chester to the young man who cleaned the spittoons. The way he sometimes smiled at something in his book, a quiet expression of pleasure that softened his features. The way his hands, large and work-roughened, turned pages carefully, like the book was something precious. One afternoon, during a rare lull in customers, Hazel was polishing glasses behind the bar when Quinn approached. She tensed automatically, her fingers tightening around the glass in her hand. "I was wondering," he said, leaning against the bar but keeping a proper distance, "if you might answer a question for me." Hazel set down the glass, her mind already racing through possible questions and acceptable answers. "I will try, sir. Do you like working here?" Of all the things he might have asked, that was the one she least expected. She blinked at him, thrown off balance. "I do not understand what you mean." "It is a simple question," Quinn said. "Do you enjoy this work, serving drinks, dealing with drunks and cowboys and miners? Is this what you want to be doing?" Hazel felt anger flare in her chest, a rare and startling emotion. "Some of us do not have the luxury of doing what we want," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Some of us do what we must to survive." Quinn's expression did not change, but something in his eyes gentled. "You are right," he said. "That was an unfair question. Forgive me." He returned to his table, and Hazel stood behind the bar feeling shaken and confused. No one had ever asked her if she liked her work. No one had ever seemed to care whether she was doing what she wanted or simply what she had to do. That night, when her shift ended, she found Quinn waiting outside the saloon, standing in the lamplight with snow dusting his hat and shoulders. "I thought I might walk you home again," he said. "If you would not mind the company." Hazel should have said no, should have maintained her boundaries and her invisibility and her safety. But the night was bitter cold and the streets were dark, and there was something in his patient, steady presence that made her feel less alone. "All right," she said. They walked in silence for the first block, their breath misting in the frozen air. Then Quinn spoke. "I grew up on a ranch in Wyoming," he said, his voice carrying easily over the quiet street. "My father raised cattle, and I learned the work from the time I could walk. It was hard, endless work, dawn to dusk and then some. But I loved it. Loved the animals, loved the land, loved the feeling of building something with my own hands." Hazel glanced at him, wondering why he was telling her this. "When I was 23, my father died. Heart gave out during a spring roundup. My mother had passed when I was young, so the ranch came to me. I was terrified," he continued. "Thought I would lose everything, that I was not ready, that I would fail. But I kept working, kept learning, kept building. And somehow, the ranch not only survived but grew." They turned onto Hazel Street, the boarding house visible ahead. "I am telling you this," Quinn said, "because I want you to know that I understand what it means to do what you must to survive. And I also want you to know that surviving is not the same as living. Sometimes, if we are very lucky, we get the chance to do both." They stopped at the bottom of the boarding house steps, and Hazel looked up at him, trying to decipher the meaning behind his words. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked, the question bursting out before she could stop it. "What do you want?" Quinn met her eyes, and his expression was so open, so honest that it made her chest ache. "I do not want anything from you, Miss Fairchild," he said quietly. "But I would like to offer you something if you will hear me out." Hazel's hands clenched inside her pockets. "What?" "Friendship," Quinn said simply. "I am in town for another 2 weeks before I need to head back to the ranch. I would like to spend some of that time getting to know you if you are willing. No obligations, no expectations. Just two people talking, maybe taking a walk when the weather allows, sharing a meal. That is all." "Why?" Hazel whispered. Quinn was quiet for a long moment, snow falling around them like a curtain of white. When he spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "Because from the moment I first saw you, trying so hard to disappear into the winter and the woodwork and the shadows, I have not been able to stop seeing you. Because there is something about you, Hazel Fairchild, that makes me want to know your story. Because when you smile, which is rare, it transforms your entire face into something beautiful. And because I think you have been invisible for far too long, and someone needs to remind you that you are worth being seen." Hazel's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever looked at her the way Quinn was looking at her now, like she mattered, like she was something more than a ghost haunting the edges of the world. "I do not know," she managed. "I do not know if I can." "That is all right," Quinn said gently. "Think about it. There is no rush, no pressure. The offer stands whenever you are ready. Or if you are never ready, that is fine too. I will not push." He touched the brim of his hat and turned to walk back the way they had come, his figure slowly disappearing into the snow and darkness. Hazel climbed the steps to the boarding house on shaking legs, her mind reeling. Once inside her room, she sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hands to her face, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She thought winter made her invisible. She had counted on it, needed it, wrapped herself in it like armor. But Quinn Gallagher was telling her he had seen her all along, that she was radiant, worth noticing, worth knowing. The idea was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Sleep did not come easily that night. Hazel lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the window panes and watching shadows dance across the ceiling. She thought about Sacramento, about her stepfather's fists and her mother's silence, about the night she finally ran with nothing but terror and determination driving her forward. She thought about the weeks of walking and begging rides and going hungry before she reached Chico. She thought about the safety she had found in anonymity, in making herself so small and quiet that no one would remember her face or ask her questions. And then she thought about Quinn's green eyes and gentle voice, about the way he kept his distance but still managed to make her feel seen. About the possibility, fragile and frightening, that maybe being invisible was not the only way to be safe. The next evening, when Quinn settled into his usual table, Hazel brought him his whiskey and stood there for a moment, gathering her courage. "I would like that," she said quietly. "The friendship you offered, I would like to try." Quinn's face broke into a smile that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners, transforming his rugged features into something warm and open. "I am very glad to hear that," he said. "Would you like to take a walk after your shift tonight? Bundle up warm and we can see the Christmas decorations some of the shops have put up." Hazel nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. Yes, I would like that. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. She fumbled glasses and miscounted change, earning a sharp look from Chester, but she could not seem to settle her thoughts. What did people talk about on walks? What if she said something stupid? What if he asked questions she did not want to answer? But when her shift ended and she met Quinn outside, wrapped in her shawl and thin coat, he did not ask difficult questions. Instead, he talked about his ranch, painting pictures with his words of wide open spaces and cattle grazing against mountain backdrops and sunrises that turned the whole world gold. "It sounds beautiful," Hazel said as they walked slowly down the main street, looking at the pine boughs and ribbons that decorated shop windows. "It is," Quinn agreed. "Lonely sometimes, but beautiful. I have a few ranch hands who help during the busy seasons, but winters are quiet. Just me and the animals and a whole lot of snow." "Do you read all winter?" Hazel asked, remembering the books she had seen him with. "As much as I can," Quinn said. "I order them from San Francisco, have them shipped up. Books about ranching and animal husbandry, but also novels and poetry. Anything to keep my mind occupied during the long evenings." They stopped in front of a general store that had arranged candles in the window to spell out "Joy to the World." The flickering light reflected off the glass, creating patterns of gold and shadow. "What about you?" Quinn asked. "What do you do when you are not working?" Hazel considered the question. The truth was, she did very little. She worked, she slept, she ate the minimum necessary to keep going. She had no hobbies, no friends, no life beyond mere survival. "I rest mostly," she said carefully. "Read the newspaper sometimes when someone leaves one at the saloon. Mend my clothes, nothing very interesting." "Do you like to read?" Quinn asked. "I used to," Hazel admitted. "When I was younger before." She trailed off, not wanting to finish that sentence. Quinn did not push. "What kind of books did you like?" "Stories," Hazel said, feeling herself relax slightly as they started walking again. "Adventures, romances, anything that took me somewhere else. My mother taught me to read when I was small. She loved books too." "She sounds like a wonderful woman," Quinn said gently. She was. Hazel's throat tightened. "She died 2 years ago. Fever took her." "I am sorry for your loss." They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps crunching in the snow. Hazel felt raw and exposed, having shared even that small piece of her history, but Quinn did not pry for more details. He simply walked beside her, a steady presence in the winter night. "I could lend you some books," he offered after a while, "if you would like. I am staying at the boarding house on Oak Street, and I brought several with me." Hazel looked up at him in surprise. "You would do that, of course," Quinn said. "Books are meant to be shared, and I would enjoy discussing them with you if you are willing." Something warm unfurled in Hazel's chest, pushing back against the cold and the fear and the years of loneliness. "I would like that very much," she said. Over the next week, a routine developed. Quinn would come to the saloon in the afternoons, order his whiskey and read or work on his ledgers. When Hazel's shift ended, he would walk her home and they would talk about everything and nothing. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle drive he was planning for spring, about the new barn he wanted to build. She told him, carefully and in small pieces, about her love of reading, about the garden her mother used to keep, about the way snow made everything feel quiet and peaceful. He lent her a novel by Charles Dickens, and she devoured it in 3 days, staying up late by candlelight despite the cold in her room. When she returned it, they spent an entire walk discussing the characters and plot, and Hazel found herself laughing at Quinn's observations, the sound strange and wonderful in her own ears. "I do not think I have heard you laugh before," Quinn said, his eyes warm with pleasure. "It is a lovely sound." Hazel felt herself blush and looked away, but she could not stop smiling. Christmas came, and the saloon was busy with men seeking warmth and company during the holiday. Hazel worked from noon until midnight, her feet aching and her patience worn thin by the evening. When she finally stepped outside, exhausted and ready for the solitude of her room, she found Quinn waiting despite the late hour. "You should not have stayed," she said, though secretly she was glad to see him. "It is so late." "I wanted to give you something," Quinn said, pulling a small wrapped package from his coat pocket. "Merry Christmas, Hazel." She stared at the package, her hands trembling as she took it. "I do not have anything for you," she said, feeling ashamed and overwhelmed. "I do not need anything," Quinn said softly. "Please open it." With fumbling fingers, Hazel unwrapped the paper to reveal a pair of leather gloves lined with soft wool. They were beautiful and practical, far nicer than anything she owned. "Your hands are always so cold," Quinn said. "I thought these might help." Hazel looked up at him, tears stinging her eyes. "This is too much. I cannot accept, please," Quinn interrupted gently. "Let me do this. Let someone care for you even in this small way." She slipped the gloves on and they fit perfectly, warm and soft against her chapped skin. "Thank you," she whispered. "They are wonderful." They walked to her boarding house through streets that were mostly empty, the rest of Chico celebrating with family and friends. When they reached her steps, Hazel turned to Quinn, struggling to find words for everything she was feeling. "I have never had a friend like you," she said finally. "Someone who just wants to know me without asking for anything in return. I do not understand it, but I am grateful for it." Quinn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His gloved fingers were gentle, his touch careful. "You deserve kindness, Hazel," he said. "You deserve to be seen and valued and cared for. I know something happened to you, something that made you want to disappear. And I know I do not have the right to ask about it. But I want you to know that when I look at you, I do not see someone who should be invisible. I see a woman who is strong and brave and resilient. I see someone who has survived things that would have broken other people. And I see beauty, not just in your face, though you are far prettier than you seem to realize, but in your spirit, in the way you move through the world with grace despite everything." Hazel could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stare at him while his words washed over her like warm water, thawing parts of her she had thought frozen beyond recovery. "I do not feel brave," she managed. "I feel like a coward, running away, hiding, trying to be invisible." "Running from danger is not cowardice," Quinn said firmly. "It is survival, and surviving takes tremendous courage." He stepped back, creating distance again, and Hazel felt the loss of his nearness like a physical thing. "Good night, Hazel," he said. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Quinn," she replied, using his first name for the first time and watching pleasure flash across his face. That night, wearing her new gloves even in bed, Hazel let herself cry for the first time in months. She cried for her mother, for the girl she used to be, for all the years of fear and pain and loneliness. But she also cried with something that felt almost like hope, because Quinn Gallagher saw her, truly saw her, and he thought she was radiant. The days between Christmas and New Year passed quickly. Hazel found herself looking forward to the end of her shifts, to the walks with Quinn, to the conversations that grew easier and more open with each passing day. He told her about losing his parents, about the weight of responsibility that sometimes felt crushing, about his dreams of expanding the ranch and maybe, someday, having a family to share it with. She told him, haltingly, about her stepfather, though she kept the worst details to herself. About how he had come into her life when she was 15, after her father died in a logging accident. About how he had seemed kind at first, but that kindness had curdled into cruelty behind closed doors. About her mother's helplessness, trapped by social convention and financial necessity. About the night, 6 months after her mother's death, when Hazel had finally run. Quinn listened without judgment, his jaw tight and his eyes dark with an anger that was not directed at her. "I am glad you got away," he said when she finished, "and I hope you know that you are safe now." "I would never hurt you, Hazel. Never." "I know," she said, and realized with some surprise that she meant it. She trusted Quinn Gallagher in a way she had not trusted anyone in years. On New Year's Eve, the saloon was packed with rowdy customers celebrating the end of 1876 and the beginning of 1877. Hazel worked frantically, dodging grabbing hands and shouted propositions, her patience wearing dangerously thin. When a drunk miner grabbed her wrist and tried to pull her onto his lap, she jerked away hard enough to knock over his beer. "You clumsy bitch," the miner snarled, standing up so fast his chair toppled backward. "Look what you did." "I apologize, sir," Hazel said quickly, falling back into the patterns of appeasement that had kept her alive for so long. "Let me get you another." "I do not want another," the miner said, stepping closer. His breath reeked of whiskey and tobacco. "I want you to be more careful. Maybe you need a lesson in manners." He raised his hand, and Hazel flinched back, her heart hammering with familiar terror. But the blow never came. Quinn was suddenly there, his hand wrapped around the miner's wrist, his expression harder than Hazel had ever seen it. "The lady apologized," Quinn said, his voice quiet but carrying an edge of steel that made the nearby conversations falter. "I suggest you accept her apology and sit down." The miner looked at Quinn's hand on his wrist, then up at Quinn's face, and whatever he saw there made him deflate. "Fine," he muttered. "No harm done." Quinn released him and turned to Hazel, his expression softening immediately. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though she was shaking. "Thank you." "Why do not you take a break?" Quinn suggested. "Get some air." Hazel glanced at Chester, who nodded his permission, probably wanting to avoid a scene that might damage his business. She slipped out the back door into the alley, gulping in cold air and trying to calm her racing heart. Quinn followed her out, closing the door behind them to muffle the noise from inside. "I am sorry," Hazel said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I should have been more careful." "You have nothing to apologize for," Quinn said firmly. "That man was drunk and out of line. None of that was your fault. I just—" Hazel's voice broke. "I hate this. I hate feeling afraid all the time, hate having to watch every word and every movement, hate that men think they can put their hands on me just because I am serving them drinks." Quinn moved closer and Hazel found herself stepping into his warmth, letting him pull her gently against his chest. She had never been held like this, with such careful tenderness, and it broke something open inside her. "You deserve better than this," Quinn said against her hair. "Better than this job, better than this town, better than constantly being afraid." "I do not have anywhere else to go," Hazel said, her voice muffled against his coat. Quinn was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was hesitant, almost nervous. "You could come with me." "To the ranch." Hazel pulled back to look at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "I know it is sudden," Quinn said quickly. "And I know we have only known each other a few weeks. But I leave in 3 days, and I cannot stand the thought of leaving you here in danger, struggling to survive. The ranch is big, and I could use help. Someone to manage the house, cook meals, keep the books. It would be honest work, and you would have your own space, your own room. No expectations beyond the work itself. You would be safe there, Hazel, safe and valued and free to just be yourself." Hazel's mind reeled. Leave Chico. Go to a ranch in Wyoming with a man she had known less than a month. It was madness. It was reckless. It was everything she had been avoiding by staying invisible and careful. "I do not know," she whispered. "It is too much, too fast." "I know," Quinn said, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I know it is a lot to ask. But think about it, please. You have 3 days to decide. And whatever you choose, I will respect it. If you want to stay here, I will understand. But if you want something different, something more, the offer is genuine." He released her and stepped back, and Hazel felt cold without his warmth. "I will think about it," she promised. The next 3 days were torture. Hazel went through her shifts in a fog, her mind constantly turning over Quinn's offer. Part of her desperately wanted to say yes, to escape the golden promise and Chester's leering looks and the endless parade of drunk, handsy customers. But another part of her was terrified. What if Quinn was not who he seemed? What if this was all some elaborate trap? What if she ended up somewhere even worse than where she had started? She tried to reason through it logically. Quinn had never been anything but respectful and kind. He had never pushed her for more than she was willing to give, had never made her feel threatened or uncomfortable. He had given her books and gloves, and his time and attention without asking for anything in return. Everything she knew about him suggested he was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man offering genuine help. But Hazel had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. On Quinn's last night in Chico, he came to the saloon as usual, but instead of ordering whiskey, he ordered coffee and sat at his corner table with his ledger, working on calculations. When Hazel's shift ended, he walked her home for what might be the last time. "Have you thought about my offer?" he asked as they made their way through the snow-covered streets. "I have thought of little else," Hazel admitted. They reached her boarding house and stopped at the familiar spot at the bottom of the steps. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead, and Hazel could see her breath misting in the air. "I am afraid," she said finally. "Afraid of making the wrong choice. Afraid of trusting again. Afraid that I will say yes and regret it, or say no and regret that even more." Quinn nodded slowly. "Fear is a reasonable response, given what you have been through. I wish I could promise you that nothing will ever hurt you again, but I cannot control the whole world. What I can promise is that I will never deliberately cause you harm. That I will treat you with respect and kindness. That you will have agency and choice and safety on my ranch. And that if you come with me and decide it is not what you want, I will personally escort you back to Chico or anywhere else you want to go, with enough money to start fresh." "Why would you do that?" Hazel asked. "Why would you make such promises to someone you barely know?" Quinn reached out and took her gloved hand in his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Because in the few weeks I have known you, Hazel Fairchild, you have become important to me." Because I think about you when I should be thinking about cattle and business. Because your smile makes my whole day brighter. Because I lie awake at night worrying about you walking home alone, or dealing with drunk customers, or working yourself to exhaustion just to survive. And because I see in you something rare and precious that this world has tried very hard to crush, and I want to protect it. Protect you. Hazel felt tears slide down her cheeks, hot against her cold skin. I do not know if I can be what you want. I want you to be exactly who you are, Quinn said firmly. Nothing more, nothing less. If you come with me as an employee, as a friend, that is enough. If someday you might want something more, I would be honored. But there is no pressure, no expectations. Just the chance for both of us to have someone to talk to during the long winter nights. Hazel looked at him, at his honest green eyes and strong, gentle hands, at the snow caught in his dark hair and the hope written across his features. She thought about the Golden Promise saloon and the smell of stale beer and cigars. She thought about her tiny, cold room and the endless stretch of days ahead, all identical, all empty of anything but survival. She thought about the books Quinn had lent her, and the conversations they had shared, and the way he made her feel seen and valued. And she thought about what her mother used to say back before the stepfather, back when there was still light in her eyes. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust someone enough to let them help us. Yes, Hazel said, the word emerging strong and clear. Yes, I will come with you. Joy blazed across Quinn's face, bright as sunrise. Truly, truly, Hazel confirmed, feeling terror and excitement warring in her chest. I will need to give Chester notice and pack my things. Tell Chester tonight, Quinn said. I will pay him whatever he would have earned from your labor for the next month, so he cannot claim you owe him anything. We leave tomorrow at noon. Can you be ready? Hazel thought about her meager possessions, 2 dresses, some undergarments, her mother's wedding ring, and the books Quinn had lent her. I can be ready. Quinn squeezed her hand gently, then released it. Thank you, he said softly. Thank you for trusting me. I promise I will do everything in my power to be worthy of that trust. That night, Hazel told Chester she was leaving. He blustered and complained about the inconvenience, but when Quinn appeared with a stack of bills, Chester's protests evaporated. Hazel packed her few belongings into a small carpet bag and lay awake in her rented room for the last time, wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life or the best decision she had ever made. Morning came cold and bright. Hazel said goodbye to Mrs. Patterson, who looked at her with knowing eyes and said, I hope you find what you are looking for, dear. Quinn was waiting outside with a wagon loaded with supplies and 2 strong horses harnessed to the front. He helped Hazel up onto the bench seat and tucked a thick blanket around her legs. It is a long journey, he said as he climbed up beside her. 5 days if the weather holds. We will stop at boarding houses and hotels along the way, separate rooms of course, and if at any point you want to turn back, just say the word. Hazel nodded, her throat too tight for words. As Quinn snapped the reins and the wagon lurched into motion, she looked back at Chico, at the town where she had tried so hard to be invisible, and felt something like relief wash through her. The journey north was challenging but beautiful. They traveled through snow-covered landscapes, past frozen rivers and forests heavy with ice. Quinn proved to be an easy traveling companion, pointing out landmarks and telling stories to pass the time. At night, they stayed in small towns along the route, and Quinn was always respectful, always careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. On the 3rd day, as they climbed into higher elevations, Quinn told her more about the ranch. It is called the Gallagher Ranch, original name I know, he said with a self-deprecating smile. About 500 acres of good grazing land, plus some timber forest. I have around 200 head of cattle right now, hoping to increase that in the spring. The house is not fancy, but it is solid and warm. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, a good kitchen and parlor. My foreman, a man named Joe, lives in the bunkhouse with a few seasonal hands. Joe's wife, Sarah, helps with cooking during the busy seasons, but she lives in town most of the year with their children. It sounds wonderful, Hazel said, trying to imagine it. It is home, Quinn said simply, and I hope it will feel like home to you too in time. They reached the ranch on the afternoon of the 5th day, and Hazel's breath caught at the sight of it. The house stood against a backdrop of mountains, smoke curling from its chimney. The barn and outbuildings were sturdy and well maintained, and even in the dead of winter, there was something beautiful about the stark landscape, the way the snow stretched white and pristine as far as the eye could see. Quinn pulled the wagon up to the house and helped Hazel down. "Welcome," he said, and the warmth in his voice made something flutter in her chest. Inside, the house was everything he had promised. Clean and well kept, with solid furniture and warm rugs on the wooden floors. Quinn showed her to a bedroom on the 2nd floor, a space that was larger than her entire room at the boarding house had been. "This is yours," he said, setting her carpetbag on the bed. "You can arrange it however you like. I am just down the hall if you need anything." Hazel walked to the window and looked out at the mountains turning gold and pink in the setting sun. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "I am glad you think so," Quinn said. He lingered in the doorway, seeming reluctant to leave. "Get settled. Rest if you need to. I will make us some supper in about an hour." Over the next weeks, Hazel settled into a routine at the ranch. She took over the cooking and housekeeping, finding unexpected pleasure in having a space to care for that actually felt like a home. Quinn was easy to cook for, appreciative of even simple meals, and he never demanded or expected, only asked politely and thanked her sincerely. They fell into comfortable rhythms. Breakfast together at dawn, then Quinn would head out to tend the animals and check fences while Hazel managed the house. Lunch was usually quick, eaten standing up or on the go, but dinner was different. Dinner they took their time with, sitting at the kitchen table and talking about everything and nothing. Quinn told her about the ranch's history, about his plans for the future, about the challenges of making a life in such a remote place. Hazel, growing more comfortable with each passing day, told him about her childhood before her father died, about the books she loved, about her dreams of someday having a garden full of flowers. "We will plant one in the spring," Quinn promised. "Whatever flowers you want." January melted into February, and Hazel found herself relaxing in ways she had not thought possible. There was something healing about the isolation of the ranch, about being surrounded by mountains and sky instead of suspicious neighbors and threatening men. Quinn gave her space, but was always available when she wanted company. He brought her more books from his collection, and they spent snowy evenings reading by the fire, the silence between them comfortable and peaceful. But as comfortable as Hazel became, she also became increasingly aware of her growing feelings for Quinn. The way her heart sped up when he smiled at her. The way she found excuses to be near him, to brush past him in the kitchen or sit closer on the settee when they rayed. The way she noticed the strength in his shoulders, the gentleness in his hands, the intelligence in his eyes. It terrified her, these feelings. She had told herself she would never trust a man again, never open her heart to the possibility of that kind of pain. But Quinn was unlike anyone she had ever known, and despite her fear, her heart was choosing him. One evening in late February, a storm rolled in with frightening speed. The wind howled around the house, and snow fell so thick Hazel could not see the barn from the kitchen window. Quinn had been out checking on the cattle, and as the minutes stretched into an hour, Hazel began to panic. She paced the kitchen, wringing her hands and jumping at every creak of the house. What if he was hurt? What if he was lost in the storm? What if she never saw him again? When the door finally burst open and Quinn stumbled in, covered in snow and shaking with cold, Hazel rushed to him without thinking. "You are all right," she gasped, her hands on his frozen coat. "I was so worried." "I am fine," Quinn said through chattering teeth. "Just cold." Storm came up faster than I expected. Hazel helped him out of his frozen outer layers and pushed him toward the fire. She heated water for coffee and brought him blankets, hovering anxiously until the color started to return to his face. "I am all right, Hazel," he said gently, catching her hand as she fussed with the blanket around his shoulders. "It takes more than a little snow to finish me off." "It was not a little snow," Hazel said, her voice sharp with residual fear. "It was a blizzard, and you were gone for so long, and I thought—" She trailed off, unable to finish. Quinn's expression softened. He tugged her hand gently, pulling her down to sit beside him on the floor in front of the fire. "What did you think?" "That you were hurt," Hazel whispered. "That something had happened to you. That I would be alone again." Quinn raised his free hand to her face, cupping her cheek with fingers that were finally warming. "I am sorry I frightened you. I should have come back sooner." "You could not control the storm," Hazel said, leaning into his touch without meaning to. I realized how much I would miss you if you were gone, how important you have become to me." Quinn's eyes searched hers, and whatever he saw there made his breath catch. "Hazel," he said softly, "I need to tell you something, and I understand if it changes things between us, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore." Hazel's heart hammered against her ribs. "What is it?" "I am in love with you," Quinn said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the words. "I have been falling in love with you since that first day in Chico, when you tried so hard not to be seen. I love your strength and your kindness and your quiet courage. I love the way you hum when you cook, and the way you look when you are lost in a book. I love your smile and your laugh, and even the sad, far-away expression you get sometimes when you think no one is watching. I love everything about you, and I know I promised no expectations, no pressure, but I cannot pretend anymore that you are just my employee or my friend. You are so much more than that to me." Hazel felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I am broken," she whispered. "Damaged. I have so much fear and so many scars." "You are not broken," Quinn said firmly, his thumb brushing away her tears. "You are healing. There is a difference. And I do not need you to be perfect or fearless. I just need you to be you." "I do not know how to do this," Hazel admitted. "I do not know how to let someone love me." "Then we will figure it out together," Quinn said. "No rush, no pressure, just you and me taking things one day at a time. If all you can give me right now is friendship, I will treasure it. If someday you think you might be able to love me back, I will wait as long as it takes." Hazel looked at him, at this good, patient, wonderful man who had seen her when she thought she was invisible, who had called her radiant when she felt worthless, who had given her safety and space and time to heal. And she realized that somewhere along the way, despite all her fear and resistance, she had already fallen in love with him. "I think I already do," she whispered. "Love you, I mean. I am terrified of it, but I do." Quinn's smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "Yeah." "Yeah," Hazel confirmed, feeling her own smile break through the tears. Quinn leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Hazel kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face, and felt something click into place in her chest, like a piece of herself she had not known was missing finally finding its home. When they pulled apart, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "We will go at your pace," he promised. Whatever you need, however long it takes for you to feel safe and sure." "I feel safe with you," Hazel said, and realized it was true. "For the first time in years, I feel truly safe." They sat by the fire until the storm passed, talking and kissing and making quiet promises to each other. When Hazel finally went up to bed, she found herself going to Quinn's room instead of her own, and he held her through the night, his arms warm and secure around her, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Spring came to the ranch in a rush of melt water and new growth. Hazel planted her garden with Quinn's help, putting in seeds for flowers and vegetables both. They worked side by side in the cool mornings, and Hazel found joy in the simple act of putting her hands in the earth, of creating something beautiful. As the days grew longer and warmer, their relationship deepened. They learned each other's rhythms and preferences, discovered shared dreams and complementary differences. Quinn taught Hazel to ride horses, and she taught him to make his mother's biscuit recipe that he remembered from childhood. They read books together on the porch in the evenings, talked about everything from philosophy to favorite foods, and built a life that felt solid and real and good. In May, Quinn asked Hazel to marry him, offering her his mother's ring with trembling hands and hope in his eyes. "I know we have not been together long," he said, "but I have never been more certain of anything. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Hazel. I want to build this ranch together, raise a family if you want that, grow old watching sunsets from our porch. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. Will you marry me?" Hazel looked at the ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond, and thought about how far she had come. From the girl who thought winter made her invisible to a woman who was loved and valued and seen. From terrified and alone to safe and cherished and home. "Yes," she said, sliding the ring onto her finger. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in June in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Quinn's foreman Joe and Joe's wife Sarah standing as witnesses. Hazel wore a dress that Sarah helped her make, white cotton with lace at the collar, and wildflowers in her hair from her own garden. Quinn wore his best suit and looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I, Quinn Gallagher, take you, Hazel Fairchild, to be my wedded wife," he said, his voice strong and sure. "I promise to love you and cherish you, to protect you and support you, to see you and value you every single day for the rest of my life. I, Hazel Fairchild, take you, Quinn Gallagher, to be my wedded husband," Hazel replied, tears streaming down her face but her voice steady. "I promise to love you and trust you, to build a life with you, to be brave enough to let myself be seen and known and loved by you for as long as we both shall live." When Quinn kissed her, sealing their vows, Hazel felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. The invisible girl had become a beloved wife, and the winter that had hidden her had given way to the spring of new beginnings. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Hazel still had nightmares sometimes, waking with her heart racing and fear clawing at her throat. But Quinn was always there, holding her and reminding her that she was safe, that the past could not hurt her anymore. They learned to communicate, to navigate the inevitable disagreements and misunderstandings that came with building a life together. But through it all, their love grew stronger and deeper, rooted in mutual respect and genuine affection. In the spring of 1878, Hazel discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had wanted children someday, but the thought of being responsible for a new life was overwhelming. "What if I do not know how?" she asked Quinn, her hands pressed to her still flat stomach. "What if I make terrible mistakes?" "Then we will make them together," Quinn said, pulling her into his arms. "And we will learn as we go, just like we have with everything else. Our child will be so loved, Hazel. That is what matters most. Their son was born in December of 1878, arriving during a snowstorm that reminded Hazel of the winter she had tried to disappear. But this time, the snow did not make her feel invisible. It made her feel cocooned and safe, bringing new life into the world with her husband beside her and a future full of promise ahead. They named him Daniel, and he had Quinn's green eyes and Hazel's smile. Watching Quinn hold their son for the first time, seeing the tears stream down his face and the overwhelming love in his expression, Hazel felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "Thank you," Quinn whispered, kissing her forehead while cradling Daniel against his chest. "Thank you for trusting me, for loving me, for giving me this incredible gift." "Thank you for seeing me," Hazel replied, her fingers brushing across Daniel's downy head, "for not letting me stay invisible." Motherhood challenged Hazel in ways she had not anticipated, but it also healed her. Holding Daniel, protecting him, loving him with a fierceness that sometimes frightened her, she began to understand her own mother better. Began to forgive the choices her mother had made, the ways she had failed to protect Hazel from her stepfather. Began to let go of some of the anger and hurt she had carried for so long. Daniel grew from infant to toddler, filling the ranch house with laughter and chaos. In 1881, Hazel gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose after the flowers that bloomed in Hazel's garden every summer. Rose had her mother's brown hair and her father's stubborn determination, and she kept her older brother on his toes from the moment she could crawl. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. The ranch prospered under Quinn's management and Hazel's careful bookkeeping. They expanded the herd, built a new barn, hired more hands for the busy seasons. Joe and Sarah became close friends, their children playing with Daniel and Rose during the summers. Hazel's garden grew larger each year, a riot of color and fragrance that drew butterflies and hummingbirds. She took up painting as a hobby, trying to capture the beauty of the mountains and sky on canvas. Quinn built her a small studio in the converted tack room, and she spent quiet afternoons there while the children napped, losing herself in color and light. In 1883, their third child was born, another son they named James. He was a quiet, thoughtful baby who seemed content to observe the world from the safety of his mother's arms. With 3 children under the age of 6, the house was never quiet, and Hazel sometimes felt exhausted beyond measure. But she also felt deeply, thoroughly happy in ways she had never dreamed possible during those dark days in Chico. One evening, when James was about 6 months old, Hazel stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Quinn came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how different my life is now," Hazel said, leaning back against his solid warmth. "About the girl I used to be, trying so hard to disappear. About how I thought winter made me invisible, and how you told me you had seen me all along." "You were always radiant to me," Quinn said, kissing the side of her neck. "Even when you were trying so hard not to be. I think that is what caught my attention first. The contrast between how beautiful you were and how desperately you wanted to hide that beauty." "I was not beautiful," Hazel protested. "I was scared and broken and running from everything." "You were beautiful and scared and surviving," Quinn corrected. "And you are still beautiful now, even more so because you have let yourself bloom instead of wilt. Because you have chosen love over fear, hope over despair, life over mere existence." Hazel turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to cup his beloved face. "I could not have done it without you. You gave me the space and safety to heal, to become who I was always meant to be." "We gave that to each other," Quinn said, kissing her softly. You healed me too, you know. I did not realize how lonely I was until you filled my life with light and love and laughter. From inside the house, they heard James start to fuss and Rose arguing with Daniel about whose turn it was to play with a particular toy. Quinn sighed good-naturedly. Duty calls. It always does, Hazel agreed, but she was smiling. They went inside together to the noise and chaos and beautiful mess of their family, and Hazel felt her heart swell with gratitude. This was her life now. Not hiding in shadows, not making herself small and invisible, but standing in the light, fully seen and deeply loved. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. There were hard winters when the cattle struggled and money was tight. There were illnesses that kept Hazel up at night, anxiously watching over feverish children and praying for recovery. There were arguments and frustrations and moments when the weight of responsibility felt crushing, but there was also so much love. Birthdays celebrated with cakes and handmade gifts. Christmases with a tree cut from their own land and decorated with popcorn strings and paper ornaments. Summer evenings catching fireflies and telling stories on the porch. Quiet moments between Hazel and Quinn, stolen kisses in the barn or long conversations after the children were asleep. In 1888, when Daniel was 10, Rose was 7, and James was 5, Hazel had a surprise that both delighted and terrified her. She was pregnant again at 32 years old with their 4th child. I thought we were done, she told Quinn, laughing and crying at the same time. I thought 3 was our number. Apparently life had other plans, Quinn said, his hand warm on her stomach. How do you feel about it? Overwhelmed, Hazel admitted, but also happy. Our children are wonderful and I cannot regret the possibility of another one. Their daughter Margaret was born in early 1889, a spring baby who arrived with the crocuses and daffodils. The older children doted on their baby sister, fighting over who got to hold her and help with her care. Watching Daniel, now 11, carefully cradle his baby sister and sing her lullabies in his changing voice, Hazel felt tears of joy stream down her face. We made this, she told Quinn that night as they lay in bed, exhausted but content. We made this family, this life, this home. Sometimes I still cannot believe it is real. It is real, Quinn assured her, pulling her close. You are real and loved and exactly where you belong. As Margaret grew, the family dynamic shifted again. The older children were becoming more independent, helping more with ranch chores and their own education. Hazel had taught them all to read and write, using the books from Quinn's collection and others they ordered from San Francisco. She took pride in their curiosity and intelligence, in the questions they asked, and the ideas they explored. Quinn was a wonderful father, patient and firm in equal measure. He taught the boys about ranching and animal care, about responsibility and integrity and hard work. He taught Rose that girls could do anything boys could do, encouraging her when she insisted on learning to rope cattle alongside her brothers. And he taught all of them, by example, what it meant to be kind and honest and brave. In 1895, when Hazel was 39 years old and Quinn was 45, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a trip to San Francisco, leaving the children in the care of Joe and Sarah. It was the first time Hazel had been back to California since leaving Chico, and she felt strange walking the bustling streets of the big city. "Are you all right?" Quinn asked, holding her hand as they navigated the crowds. "Just thinking about how far I have come," Hazel said. "Literally and figuratively. That scared girl who ran from Sacramento seems like a different person now." "She was a different person," Quinn agreed. "But she was also you, and she deserves credit for being brave enough to run, to survive, to eventually trust again. Without her, we would not be here now. They stayed in a fine hotel and ate at restaurants with white tablecloths and multiple forks. They went to the theater and walked through gardens and bought gifts for the children. And at night, in their hotel room overlooking the city lights, they made love with the passion and tenderness of a couple who had weathered 20 years together and emerged stronger for it. "I love you," Hazel whispered as Quinn held her afterward, her head on his chest and his heartbeat steady in her ear. "I love you more now than I did when we married, and I loved you so much then I thought my heart would burst." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Quinn said, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "You are my greatest adventure, Hazel Gallagher, my greatest joy and my greatest blessing." When they returned to the ranch, they found the children healthy and happy, the ranch running smoothly under Joe's management, and a litter of puppies that Rose had convinced Sarah to let her keep in the barn. "Can we keep them, Ma?" Rose begged, her eyes pleading. "Please." "I will take care of them, I promise." Hazel looked at Quinn, who shrugged with a smile. "Every ranch needs good dogs," he said, so the puppies stayed, growing into loyal cattle dogs that followed the children everywhere. Life continued its rhythm of seasons and milestones, challenges and celebrations. Daniel grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, talking about taking over the operation someday. Rose, fierce and independent, talked about becoming a doctor, fascinated by the human body and how to heal it. James, quieter but equally determined, showed an aptitude for business and numbers that suggested he might be the one to expand the ranch beyond what Quinn had built. And Margaret, the baby of the family, showed early signs of artistic talent, drawing and painting with a natural ability that reminded Hazel of herself. In 1900, as the century turned and Daniel prepared to take on more responsibility at the ranch, Hazel sat in her studio painting the view from the window. She was 44 now, her hair showing threads of silver, her face lined with years of laughter and worry and joy. But she felt more beautiful than she ever had as a young woman, because she had learned that beauty was not about smooth skin or youthful features. It was about living fully, loving deeply, and allowing yourself to be seen. Quinn came into the studio, his own hair gray at the temples, his body still strong but marked by decades of hard work. "Beautiful," he said, looking at her painting. "You have really developed your skill." "Thank you," Hazel said, adding a touch of gold to the sunset she was capturing on canvas. "I have had good inspiration." Quinn moved behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "Do you remember what I told you that first Christmas in Chico? That you were radiant?" "I remember," Hazel said softly. "I want you to know that it is still true," Quinn said. 23 years later, you are still the most radiant person I have ever known. You light up every room you enter, every life you touch. Our children are who they are because of your love and guidance. This ranch is a home because of the warmth and beauty you have brought to it. And I am the man I am because you chose to trust me with your heart." Hazel set down her brush and turned to face him, her hands coming up to cup his face. "You saved me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "When I thought I was meant to be invisible, when I had given up on being seen or known or loved, you saved me." "We saved each other," Quinn corrected, kissing her gently. "That is what love does. It sees us when we cannot see ourselves. It calls us out of the shadows and into the light. It makes us brave enough to believe we deserve happiness." They stood together in the studio, surrounded by Hazel's paintings and the golden afternoon light, and kissed with all the passion and tenderness of a couple who had built a lifetime together and would continue building it for however many years they had left. The next decade brought more changes. Daniel married a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth in 1903, and they settled in a house Quinn and Hazel built for them on the edge of the property. Rose left for medical school in 1905, one of the few women brave enough to pursue such a path, and Hazel's heart burst with pride watching her daughter refuse to let anyone diminish her dreams. James took over the financial management of the ranch in 1907, implementing new systems that increased their profitability significantly. And Margaret, at 18, received a scholarship to study art in San Francisco, her talent recognized by people who mattered in that world. In 1908, Daniel and Elizabeth gave Hazel and Quinn their first grandchild, a boy named Matthew. Holding her grandson for the first time, Hazel was overwhelmed by the continuity of it all, the way love multiplied and expanded across generations. "Your great-grandmother would have loved to meet you," she whispered to baby Matthew. "She would have been so proud of the family we have built." Quinn, watching from the doorway with tears in his eyes, crossed the room to put his arm around Hazel's shoulders. "Look at what we made," he said wonderfully. "Look at the life we built." More grandchildren followed as the years passed. Rose, despite her busy medical practice, married a fellow doctor in 1910 and had twin girls in 1911. James married in 1912 and had a son in 1913. Margaret married an artist she met in San Francisco in 1914 and had a daughter in 1915. The ranch continued to prosper, now truly a family operation with Daniel managing the day-to-day cattle work, James handling the business side, and Rose providing medical care for the family and the ranch hands. Margaret's art brought in additional income and raised the family's profile in California society, though she always came home to the ranch for holidays and special occasions. In 1916, as America teetered on the edge of entering the Great War raging in Europe, Hazel and Quinn celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The entire family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration, with children and grandchildren filling the house and yard with noise and laughter. At 60 years old, Hazel looked around at the family she and Quinn had created, at the life they had built from nothing but love and trust and determination, and felt overcome with gratitude. "Speech, Grandma," one of the grandchildren called out, and the others took up the cry. Hazel stood, Quinn rising beside her, their hands clasped together. She looked out at the sea of beloved faces, at the children she had raised and the grandchildren who carried their legacy forward, and felt tears slide down her cheeks. 40 years ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly, I was a scared young woman who thought the only way to survive was to make myself invisible. I believed that winter made me disappear, that if I was small enough and quiet enough, the world would forget I existed and therefore could not hurt me. She paused, looking at Quinn, who smiled encouragingly. But then I met your grandfather, she continued. And he told me something I will never forget. He said, I have seen you all along, and you are radiant. Those words changed my life. They made me brave enough to be seen, to be known, to be loved. They made me believe that I deserved happiness and safety and a future full of joy instead of fear. She turned to face Quinn fully, tears streaming freely now. You gave me everything, she said. You gave me a home and a family and a life beyond my wildest dreams. You saw me when I could not see myself, and you loved me when I did not know how to accept love. Everything good in my life, everything beautiful and precious and worthwhile, started with you choosing to see me. Quinn pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the family erupted in applause and cheers. When they finally pulled apart, Quinn had his own speech to make. Hazel Gallagher, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You are the love of my life and the light of my days. 40 years ago, I saw a woman trying to disappear and recognized in her something rare and precious that the world had tried to destroy. I am so grateful that you were brave enough to trust me, to take a chance on a rough cowboy who could offer you nothing but a remote ranch and a heart full of love. You have made every day of the last 40 years better than I could have imagined. I love you more than words can express, and I will love you for whatever time we have left, whether that is 40 more years or 40 more days. They kissed to more applause, and the party continued long into the night, with music and dancing and stories shared around the fire. The years that followed were quieter but no less rich. Quinn and Hazel, now in their 60s, stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting their children to carry on what they had built. They spent their days gardening, reading, painting, and playing with their growing number of grandchildren. They took walks every evening, weather permitting, revisiting all the places on the ranch that held memories. The spot where Quinn had first taught Hazel to ride. The creek where they used to bring the children for picnics. The hill where they would sit and watch the sunset, dreaming about the future. "You have any regrets?" Hazel asked one evening as they sat on that hill, both of them moving more slowly now but still mobile and healthy. "Not a single one," Quinn said firmly. "Everything I have done, every choice I have made led me to you and to this life. How could I regret any of that? I wish I could have given you more children," Hazel said softly. "I know you would have loved a bigger family." Quinn turned to her, his eyes still that same striking green despite his age. "Hazel, you gave me 4 incredible children, 11 grandchildren at last count, a successful ranch and 43 years of the deepest love and happiness a man could ask for. You have given me more than enough. More than I ever dreamed possible." Hazel leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and smiled. "I love you, Quinn Gallagher, then, now, and always." "I love you too, Hazel Gallagher, my radiant, remarkable, wonderful wife." They sat together as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, and Hazel thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the invisible girl in Chico to the matriarch of a sprawling family, from broken and afraid to whole and beloved. Winter had not made her invisible after all. It had only been the darkness before the dawn, the cold before the spring, the ending before the beginning. And Quinn had been there to see her through it all, to remind her that she was visible and valuable and radiant, even when she could not see it herself. That was what love did, Hazel realized. It saw you when you could not see yourself. It believed in you when you had stopped believing. It called you out of hiding and into the light, and it stayed with you through all the seasons of life, the winters and springs and summers and falls, until the very end. In 1925, Quinn fell ill with pneumonia. At 70 years old, his body did not have the strength to fight it off. Hazel nursed him through the worst of it, and though he survived, he was never quite the same afterward. His breathing was labored, his energy limited, his once robust body fragile in ways that broke Hazel's heart, but his love for her never wavered. Even when he could barely get out of bed, his eyes would light up when she entered the room. Even when he could not walk to their hill to watch the sunset, he would hold her hand and tell her she was beautiful. Even when the effort of speaking exhausted him, he would whisper, "I love you," with his last breath of the day. In the spring of 1926, as the flowers in Hazel's garden began to bloom and the mountains turned green with new growth, Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep with Hazel beside him. He was 71 years old, and they had been married for 48 years. The loss was devastating. Hazel felt like half of herself had been torn away, leaving a wound that would never fully heal. but surrounded by her children and grandchildren, supported by the family and community they had built together. She found the strength to keep going. She lived another 12 years, long enough to see all her grandchildren grown and to meet several great-grandchildren. She continued painting, creating some of her best work in those years, canvases filled with memory and love, and the beauty of the land Quinn had showed her. She told stories to the younger generations about their grandfather, about the cowboy who had seen her when she thought she was invisible, who had called her radiant and meant it with every fiber of his being. In 1938, at the age of 82, Hazel Gallagher passed away peacefully in her sleep, in the house Quinn had brought her to all those years ago. Her children buried her beside Quinn on the hill where they used to watch the sunsets, and they planted wildflowers from her garden all around the graves. The ranch continued under Daniel's management and eventually passed to Matthew, Quinn and Hazel's first grandson. The paintings Hazel had created were divided among the family treasured heirlooms that hung in homes across California and beyond. And the story of how they met, of the invisible girl and the cowboy who saw her, was passed down through generations as a reminder that love can heal even the deepest wounds, that being seen and known and valued is one of the most powerful gifts we can receive, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust someone enough to let them love us. On the hill where Quinn and Hazel Gallagher rest side by side, the wildflowers bloom every spring in a riot of color, visible from miles away, radiant and beautiful and impossible to overlook, just like the love story they represent.